Alice Normington is the production designer on the Essex Serpent. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Alice, I wanted to begin with the scope of the project because it's really far-reaching. We start in London, we go to Essex, we go to some of the rural, communities around Essex. So I just wanted to ask you, what was most exciting and challenging about just the size of the project, especially since it's a period piece too? Just what was most challenging about that?
I think the most challenging thing was working in Essex with the weather and the tides and the mud. So, London it is what it is to a certain extent. And I've done quite a lot of period filming in London. So the amount of work in that landscape, and I don't think any of us had any idea how much the tides would dictate what we could and couldn't do. So there were some days, you'd get 2 hours in the morning where you could dress the set before it was flooded, or so it was quite a challenge for everyone, actually, just that physical aspect of it, like working in those kind of muddy they look great, but the reality behind the camera is the art department dragging props and things through that landscape. But it was worth it. So I'd say that was probably the biggest challenge, and always the budget. We had limited funds for as you say, a lot of scope, so it was trying to figure out how we could do what we wanted to do and put as much of it on in front of the camera without compromising. So yeah, I think definitely the landscape and the mud.
Yeah, I really wanted to ask you more about scouting that location. So it sounds like it is in Essex, but I just wanted to ask you, like you said, it was worth the effort because the visuals are so striking. It's absolutely beautiful and haunting. And we have all those, rivulets and just a very kind of gorgeous landscape. So talk about scouting that location.
It's very specific, actually, and I'm sure I didn't meet the writer of the book, but I believe that she was very specific when she was writing about that landscape. And before I started, the location manager, who I've done this is my third job with her, she had been scouting other parts of the UK. I think they wanted to be sure that Essex was the right place to go, so she looked at Norfolk and Suffolk, and she said everything just kept bringing her back to Essex. And I've been there before, but I've got to say it's one of those parts of the UK I didn't know really well. And that's something that's so great about my job, is that I get to discover a little part of even London at times. You think, wow, this street, I've lived here my whole life. I was born here. I didn't know this street existed. So when I started, I spoke to Harriet, and she said, I think you're all going to agree, but I'm going to show you the pictures of other areas. And to be honest, we just looked at Essex and said, this is it. This is where the story is set. This is the world that this story exists in. And it is so specific and peculiar and beautiful and bleak but beautiful and magnificent. And when you look down on those salt marshes, which is where all the kind of little rivulets, it's like when you look down on it from above, it's like a kind of big brain of sort of all these rivers joining into each other, and the tide, it's like this ever shifting landscape. There are times where it's completely underwater and you're literally just looking at water, and then 2 hours later you're looking at mud. So what the sea and the air and the light and the weather does to that landscape is quite extraordinary, actually. It really is. So it's just a really special place. And when you get to know it and find all the little corners of it, and you sort of realize how much people that do live there and know it love it, and it's not touristy at all. It's because it is a bit bleak. It's not like sandy beaches or places you go for holidays. You go there to walk your dog and experience that landscape, and quite lost in time. It hasn't really changed. I think that's the other thing. the world of Starbucks hasn't quite infiltrated. Yay, thank God. One of the last few places. You can get a Starbucks if you go into a bigger town, but it's not like a lot of the south coast of England or other places where it's, you know, holidays, and it's a really special place. So I love discussing it.
That really, it really translates on screen. It's quite magical to watch.
We were in it, and I think when you're in it, you almost don't see it anymore because it's just there in front of you. But I mean, even all the months of prep and filming, there were still days, Harriet and I, the location manager and I, we would just go out there and go, wow, this is amazing, isn't it? You know, look at this landscape, and, you know, really hoping it would get captured on film. So
yeah. It certainly does. And you mentioned a moment ago, you know, working with the novel, or you mentioned the novel. So my question was really to ask you, you know, how much of the original novel by Sarah Perry was did you use for inspiration? Did you draw on it often, or were you really working more with the scripts?
Actually. Yeah, I sort of read them in tandem, and weirdly, my partner was reading this book, and he had it on his bedside table, and I had this script, and I didn't relate the two because the working title was Estuary, not the Essex Serpent, and it opened with on the London Underground, and it actually took me a while to realise it wasn't contemporary because it didn't say 1893. So it's only when we figured it out, and I said, I think this might be the book you're reading, and he said, this is so you have got to get this job, this is like your book. And so I then read the book, and it's very evocative of its place. So I definitely drew on, you know, certain paragraphs and descriptions, and a lot of that was in the scripts as well. But so they tied very closely together, and you know, she writes very evocatively of place. So yeah, I read it and saved a few choice paragraphs, and yeah.
Yeah, before we dive more into Essex and the marshes, because I do have a lot of questions on that, I just want to start with London because that's where the series begins.
Yeah.
Especially in Cora's London house, which is, the colors are so striking. I mean, it's these deep reds in the bedchamber. So just wanted to ask you about, you know, what are you conveying with those colors, and are there favorite details in the London sets, you know, that you're really happy about?
Yeah, no, so London, so there's a very, very specific kind of concept with the whole piece, and it was very clear, I think, once Clio and I had kind of got to, I call it my framework, like once I've got a framework for a piece, you kind of pin everything onto that. So London is Cora's hell, so that's where it is. You know, Essex is our heaven, and the rectory is her earth. It's so like all those things kind of pinned onto that. So, you know, it's her hell because she's trapped in an abusive marriage. So it's, you know, it's a gilded cage of, it's beautiful, it's lovely to look at, but it's claustrophobic and cloying and dark and red. So Michael's bedroom, it could only ever be red, really. Once we kind of got to that, I mean, we talked about blues and greens and, you know, shall we make it cold? But red is a really violent color, it's a really passionate color, and I think it can go horribly wrong. Actually, it's one of those colors that is very strong, and we couldn't build the house, just we didn't have the money, so we, you know, really struggled to find that location. But what was great about that is there's a connecting door between the two bedrooms, so the sense of, like, when she enters Michael's bedroom, it's like the jaws of hell, and also he can watch her and see her, and so that was a really big theme, which then contrasted with her cottage in Essex being all white and heaven, and even though it's small and plain and simple and she's discarded all her worldly goods, she's happy there for the first time. So that was a really big thing. And then we talked a lot actually about the dead husband's character. Like, you don't really see Michael, but it is his house. You know, she inhabits his world. She is a kept object. So Claire and I actually talked a lot about who Michael was, and you know, that's where his sort of surroundings came from. So we really wanted London to feel very modern. So I looked at the aesthetic movement, which at the time was like the equivalent of modern art. It was really, really modern. It was very specific, and Michael wasn't, you know, he was an aesthete. So everything he has around him is because it's beautiful and modern, and so Cora is like one of his collected objects. So that's when then that led to her being in a gilded cage, and then we talked a lot about linear and lines and graphicness, and so that led to lots of decisions with, you know, the brass beds that were prison-like and bars. And I mean, I could talk for hours about this because it's my favorite subject, but you know, there's so much thought that goes into that. And then birds became another theme, you know, being sort of free or being trapped, and so that, you know, her wallpaper is peacocks, and there's kind of birds that you see even subtly, you see them embroidered into lace in her cottage. So that became another, a kind of visual theme, I guess. But they were sort of the big themes, really, that, you know, her London life is her hell. For her it's hell. And I've shown some friends images and they said, oh, it looks lovely, it doesn't look hellish at all. And I said, but for Cora, this is hell. It's beautiful, but hell. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, the set really, it does convey that, especially, you know, when you see the flashbacks to, you know, what their dynamic was like, you know, that it really ties into what you've done with the set dressing.
yeah.
I did want to ask you next exactly where you were going, which is, you know, the contrast with Cora's cottage, but also the Vickery, Will's home, because
Yeah.
they're very simple, as you said, and kind of very clean. And it does feel like a really nice blank canvas for you to dress up with, as you were saying. There's beautiful tapestries, there's very colorful tea kettles and tea sets. So just wanted to ask you about, you know, having the opportunity to bring a lot of color and life into some very kind of stark backgrounds.
So the rectory and Cora's cottage, the exterior was obviously a location, and then we built the interiors in the studio. So in a way that the restrictions of that give you what the layout and the architecture has to be, because of the doors and the windows. And you know, I looked at lots of various artists, and it was important to be able to open it up and get views through into other rooms. But so Cora's cottage, again, very simple. It needed to feel like her heaven, and like everything was stripped out of her London life. So that was, everything was tones of white, and I just used yellow at points, which, you know, kind of really was to show the sunshine and to show light and life and sun and happiness. And the rectory was sort of based on all things earthly, really, and it was all kind of earthy colors and friendly and textural and layered and happy sort of family life and history of family. And so there was color in there that was very different to everything else. And then we used the red sails of the boats that you see in Essex, which we kind of faded that out. So that was kind of like the theme, the dark, vivid reds of London kind of just bleached out as we went through. So yeah, the rectory was very much based on kind of earthly delights and family life and texture and happy home, and lots of details with family kind of objects and things that the kids had made. And yeah, there was a lot to draw on. I mean, it was so many different things you could draw on as a designer, which was great.
Yeah, you just mentioned family too, and what is so nice about the series too is, as we're in Essex, we really do get a sense of the community. It's a modest, you know, fishing community. So I wanted to ask you about, you know, bringing the kind of wider world of Essex to life in, you know, we have the market and we have the tavern and we have these other locations that the community really gathers in. So just talk about, you know, bringing those other locations to life.
So Old Winter was, again, it was a fictitious place that that Clive and I were very kind of specific about. We wanted it to feel not set in any time. You know, it almost like it could have been 100 years earlier or more. And it, you know, their sort of superstition of this beast is, you know, it started in the late 1600s and it had never really gone away. So we really wanted the contrast of very modern life in London, and also the whole theme of the sort of medical work that was going on. You know, at the time that was like cutting edge, you know, like really, really cutting edge scientific work. So we wanted London to feel very modern and Aldwinter to feel very, very old and lost in another time. Again, we had to use locations. We couldn't build the big exterior pieces on a location. So, you know, there's not a lot left. I mean, that's the reality. It is harder and harder to find good period locations that, you know, don't have PVC windows and, you know, modern extensions. So we were very, very lucky in finding the location where the run of cottages are, and then Cracknell's cottage is out on this sort of mad little island that gets completely cut off at high tide. That was fantastic. So that led us to the white clapboard style of housing, and then that again became a very clear, Aldwinter is black and white, it's monochrome. It's like, that's how they see things. These people see the world in black and white. It's science or religion, it's this or that, there's no in between, you know. So whereas Cora and Will want to see all the in-betweens and try and learn. So again, we were very specific. We can't have brick buildings. It's got to be this white clapboard. And so that, you know, led us to scour Essex for what we could find and piece together little bits here and there. Some of the interiors are actually in London. So we, you know, had to try and piece together this interior that was supposed to be in that exterior. So the schoolroom, the pub, Henry Banks' cottage, that was all built into an interior one. We had a kind of composite London interior, and some of it in the studio as well. Henry Banks we built in the studio in the end. So yeah, it's that framework. Once you had that framework, it makes it easier and harder at the same time, because you know what you want, but if you can't find it, nothing else will do. You know, you can't suddenly have a pink painted house or a red brick house, so it's got to be black and white and monochrome. So yeah, and old. It needed to feel really ancient. The church, that's another one that was quite close to London. That wasn't in Essex. That was very hard to find something that felt that rooted in another time.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary location. Okay, before I let you go, one final question. By the time this airs, people will have seen 3 of the 6 episodes. So I just wanted to ask if you could tease anything about, you know, is there a favorite location of yours coming up in the last few episodes that people haven't seen?
I flicked through all of them. I haven't, I'm trying to think, because I watched 1 and 2 on the big screen quite recently. Do you know, I actually can't think what's in the ones ahead. And I think you do see quite a lot. I'm trying to think what's in. You've stumped me there. I can't think. I think you definitely see more of her London home in the probably 5 and 6. You didn't see that much of it in episode 1. So I think you do see a bit more of it, and more of her bedroom as well. I actually can't think, because over 6 hours, and it's been a while since I've flicked through them. So you've probably seen more than I have recently. So.
Well, we will look forward to seeing more of the home in the final few episodes. Alice Normington, congratulations on the Essex Serpent, and thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
You're welcome.